Dakota Arnold took the lives of his parents, Margaret and Robert Arnold, in what would become one of the most disturbing cases of juvenile violence ever recorded in Oklahoma. The couple was found brutally murdered in their modest suburban home on Willow Creek Drive, with multiple wounds inflicted by construction tools belonging to Robert Arnold, a respected foreman at Heartland Construction. Medical examiners would later determine that the murders occurred between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., when both victims were asleep in their bed, giving them no chance to defend themselves against the calculated attack that ended their lives. The viciousness of the crime scene stood in stark contrast to the picture-perfect family photos that lined the hallway of the Arnold home, images of smiling faces that gave no indication of the horror that had unfolded. If you're watching this, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth coverage of true crime cases that challenge our understanding of human psychology. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this case in the comments below, and let us know where you're watching from. Now, back to the unfolding tragedy of the Arnold family and the events that would shake the foundations of Oklahoma's criminal justice system. The responding officers found young Dakota huddled in the corner of his bedroom, apparently in shock, clutching his favorite stuffed animal and with traces of blood on his pajamas that he claimed came from discovering his parents and trying to wake them. His tearful account described hearing noises in the night and finding his parents already dead, pointing investigators toward his best friend, Tyler Wilson, who allegedly had been angry with Dakota's parents for not allowing him to stay overnight the previous weekend. The boy's story seemed plausible at first glance, a traumatized child who had witnessed the aftermath of a terrible crime committed by someone else, perhaps an intruder, or, as he suggested, his disgruntled friend. However, as the first 24 hours of the investigation unfolded, inconsistencies began to emerge in Dakota's account, raising quiet concerns among the experienced detectives assigned to the case. Oklahoma City, with its flat landscapes punctuated by modern downtown buildings and sprawling suburban neighborhoods, had seen its share of domestic violence. But nothing had prepared the community for the possibility that a child not yet in double digits could commit such a calculated act of violence against his own parents. The quiet neighborhood of Willow Creek Estates, with its well-maintained lawns and community pool, became the epicenter of media attention as news vans lined the streets and neighbors gathered in small clusters, exchanging shocked whispers about the family they thought they knew. Local schools immediately deployed counselors to help classmates process the news, while parents across the city hugged their children tighter, suddenly confronted with questions about what might lurk beneath the surface of childhood innocence. The case immediately captured the attention of the public, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the age of the person who would soon emerge as the primary suspect. Detective Melissa Taylor, a 15-year veteran of the Oklahoma City Police Department with specialized training in crimes involving juveniles, took the lead on the case, joined by her partner, Detective Jason Barnes, who had recently transferred from the Auto Theft Division. The detectives approached the initial interview with Dakota with extreme caution, mindful of both his age and the trauma he had potentially experienced, using techniques designed to put the child at ease while gathering crucial information. As Dakota recounted his version of events for the third time, Detective Barnes noted subtle changes in the timeline and details, particularly regarding when the boy claimed to have last seen Tyler Wilson and the specific sequence of discovering his parents' bodies. The inconsistencies were minor, the kind that might be expected from a child in shock. But something about Dakota's composure struck Detective Barnes as unusual, triggering the instincts he had developed over years of interrogating suspects who were hiding something. The Arnold home, a modest 4-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood of Oklahoma City, showed no signs of forced entry, with all doors and windows secure from the inside, immediately suggesting that the perpetrator either had a key or was already inside the home when the murders took place. Crime scene technicians meticulously documented blood spatter patterns that indicated the attacks had begun while both victims were sleeping, with defensive wounds minimal, suggesting they had little opportunity to fight back against their attacker. The murder weapons, a hammer and a box cutter from Robert Arnold's work tools, were found cleaned and returned to the garage toolbox, an unusual level of evidence remediation that raised immediate red flags among the investigative team. What kind of intruder or angry friend would take the time to clean and properly store the murder weapons before fleeing the scene? Oklahoma City, straddling the geographical heart of the state, has long embodied the complex duality of Oklahoma itself, a place where traditional values and modern realities often find themselves in uncomfortable coexistence. The community's initial response to the Arnold murders reflected this tension, with many residents refusing to accept the possibility that a child could be capable of such violence, instead embracing theories about unknown intruders or adult influences manipulating the boy. The summer heat hung heavy over the city in the days following the murders, the temperature soaring into the high 90s as investigators worked around the clock, their collars darkened with sweat as they combed through evidence at the crime scene. The prairie wind carried rumors from house to house, and the city's long history of weathering both natural and human-made disasters seemed insufficient preparation for the horror that had visited Willow Creek Estates. Detective Taylor instructed the crime scene unit to pay special attention to the family computer, a standard procedure in modern investigations, but one that would yield unexpected and damning evidence in the case. The technician who examined the browser history made a discovery that would dramatically alter the course of the investigation. Multiple searches from the day before the murders, including how to avoid leaving fingerprints, can children be tried as adults, and cleaning blood from clothing. These searches had been conducted during school hours when only Dakota should have been home, as he had claimed to be sick that day, while both of his parents were confirmed to have been at work. The digital evidence cast an immediate shadow over Dakota's tearful story and shifted the investigation's focus squarely onto the 9-year-old boy who had just lost his parents, or perhaps more accurately, had just taken their lives with a level of premeditation that shocked even the most seasoned investigators on the case. Margaret Arnold, 42, had served as the children's librarian at the Oklahoma City Public Library's Willow Creek branch for over 15 years, beloved by generations of young readers who knew her for her animated storytime sessions and patient guidance through the world of books. Colleagues described her as dedicated and nurturing, someone who took particular joy in helping reluctant readers discover stories that could capture their imagination and foster a lifelong love of reading. Her workspace at the library remained untouched for weeks after her death, the small potted plants on her desk withering as her absence became a painful reality for the community that had cherished her presence. In the last staff meeting before her death, Margaret had expressed concern about Dakota's recent behavioral changes, mentioning to a close colleague that he had become increasingly secretive and resistant to the household rules, particularly the 8 p.m. curfew that she and Robert had instituted after noticing their son's attempts to sneak out after they had gone to bed. Robert Arnold, 45, had worked his way up from apprentice to foreman at Heartland Construction, earning respect for his attention to detail and fair management style that made him popular with both clients and crews. His co-workers described him as a family man who often shared proud stories about Dakota, believing his son to be exceptionally bright and mature for his age, attributes that Robert hoped would lead to opportunities he himself had never had. The construction site where Robert had been overseeing a new commercial development fell silent when news of his murder reached the crew, with workers removing their hard hats in a moment of respect for the man who had mentored many of them through their careers. In the weeks before his death, Robert had confided in his supervisor about increasing tension at home, specifically mentioning arguments with Dakota over restrictions on his activities and computer use, struggles that Robert had attributed to normal childhood testing of boundaries, rather than something more sinister. The Arnolds had adopted Dakota when he was just 18 months old, after years of unsuccessful fertility treatments had left them believing they might never experience parenthood. The adoption agency had described the toddler as bright and adaptable, though noted he had already experienced multiple foster placements due to behavioral issues that the agency attributed to early instability. Margaret and Robert had embraced the challenges of raising Dakota with optimism and commitment, investing in early intervention services and creating what they believed was a stable, loving environment where their son could thrive despite his difficult start in life. Home videos recovered from the family's collection showed birthday celebrations, vacations to the Gulf Coast, and ordinary moments of family life that gave no indication of the violence that would eventually destroy them all. Teachers at Willow Creek Elementary School, where Dakota had been enrolled since kindergarten, described him as an intelligent student who excelled academically but struggled with peer relationships and authority figures, often receiving disciplinary notes for defiance and occasional aggression toward classmates. His third-grade teacher, Ms. Williams, had requested a parent-teacher conference just 2 weeks before the murders to discuss an incident where Dakota had threatened another student who had accidentally damaged a notebook that Dakota kept closely guarded. The meeting had resulted in Dakota losing computer privileges at home for a week, a punishment that Margaret had later told Ms. Williams had resulted in an explosive tantrum unlike anything they had seen from their son before. The notebook in question was never recovered during the investigation, leaving questions about what information it might have contained that was so precious to the boy that its damage had triggered such an intense reaction. Oklahoma City's tight-knit neighborhoods, like Willow Creek Estates, function as extended families, where neighbors take pride in watching out for one another's children and maintaining a sense of collective responsibility for community well-being. The Arnolds had been active participants in this community ecosystem, with Margaret organizing the annual neighborhood book drive and Robert volunteering his construction expertise for the maintenance of the local playground. Their sudden and violent removal from this social fabric left a wound that extended far beyond their immediate household, creating a collective grief that manifested in impromptu memorials outside the library and construction site where they had worked. The community struggled to reconcile the loving parents they had known with the narrative that began to emerge about their troubled relationship with the son who would ultimately be charged with ending their lives. The investigation revealed that in the months leading up to their deaths, Margaret and Robert had consulted with a family therapist regarding their concerns about Dakota's increasing defiance and emotional distance, seeking professional guidance on how to maintain appropriate boundaries while supporting their son's development. The therapist's notes, subpoenaed during the investigation, documented escalating conflicts over Dakota's repeated attempts to leave the house after bedtime and his obsessive interest in cars and driving, behaviors the parents had attributed to normal childhood fascinations rather than indicators of criminal activity. The therapy sessions had resulted in the implementation of a structured behavior management system, including the strict curfew that required Dakota to be in his room by 8 p.m. with electronic devices surrendered to his parents until morning, a system that, unknown to the Arnolds, directly interfered with the criminal enterprise their 9-year-old son had established. Margaret and Robert Arnold had been married for 17 years, having met as undergraduates at the University of Oklahoma, where she studied library science, and he majored in construction management. Friends described their relationship as solid and loving, built on shared values and mutual respect that had weathered the challenges of infertility and the sometimes difficult journey of adoptive parenthood. Their date nights were a standing tradition. Every other Friday spent trying new restaurants in Oklahoma City or attending local theater performances, maintaining their connection as a couple, even as they devoted themselves to raising Dakota. The Friday before their deaths had been one such evening, with babysitting provided by Margaret's mother, who later told investigators that Dakota had seemed unusually interested in when his parents would return and whether they would check on him before going to bed, questions that would later take on a sinister significance in light of the methodical planning revealed by the computer searches. The victims of this tragedy extended beyond Margaret and Robert Arnold, to include the community that had embraced them, the children who had relied on Margaret's guidance through literature, and the construction crews who had respected Robert's leadership and fairness. Their deaths created ripples of loss and confusion that spread outward from the epicenter of violence in their home, touching lives throughout Oklahoma City, and eventually the nation, as the case gained prominence in discussions about juvenile crime and the justice system. The senselessness of their deaths, murdered by the child they had chosen to love and raise as their own, added an additional layer of tragedy to a case already heavy with loss, raising painful questions about the nature of family bonds and the limits of understanding the human capacity for violence, especially when that violence emerges from someone so young. The 911 call came in at 6:32 a.m. on August 9, 2018. When the Arnold's next-door neighbor, Ellen Simmons, responded to frantic knocking at her door to find Dakota in blood-spattered pajamas, seemingly hysterical and barely able to communicate that something had happened to his parents. The dispatcher instructed Ellen to keep the boy at her home while officers were dispatched to the Arnold residence, where they discovered the horrific scene that would launch one of the most disturbing investigations in Oklahoma City's history. Officer Daniel Rodriguez, first to arrive on the scene, described finding the master bedroom like something from a horror film, with blood spatter covering the walls and ceiling, and both victims having suffered multiple traumatic injuries that had clearly been inflicted with significant force. The initial assessment by the responding officers noted the incongruity between the violence of the scene and the apparent lack of struggle or forced entry, immediately raising questions about who could have gained such easy access to the Arnolds in their most vulnerable state. Detective Melissa Taylor arrived at the scene at 7:15 a.m., immediately implementing protocols for a high-profile homicide investigation, including securing an expanded perimeter around the property and calling in the department's most experienced crime scene technicians. Her partner, Detective Jason Barnes, was assigned to interview Dakota at the neighbor's house, approaching this crucial first interaction with a delicate balance of compassion for a potentially traumatized child and professional skepticism developed over years of interviewing witnesses and suspects. Taylor's initial walkthrough of the crime scene revealed several noteworthy elements. The murder weapons had been cleaned and returned to their proper storage locations. Drawers and cabinets throughout the house showed no signs of being searched or disturbed, as would be expected in a robbery. And both victims appeared to have been attacked in their sleep, with the first blows likely rendering them unconscious. These observations, noted meticulously in Taylor's preliminary report, painted a picture not of a chaotic crime of opportunity or passion, but rather a calculated attack by someone familiar with the home and the victim's routines. The forensic team began their methodical documentation and collection of evidence, photographing the scene from multiple angles and carefully preserving blood spatter patterns that would later help reconstruct the sequence and nature of the attacks. Technician Sarah Johnson, processing the master bathroom, made a significant discovery when she noticed unusual water splatter patterns around the sink that suggested recent cleaning, along with faint bloodstains in the drain that had not been completely washed away. In the garage, another technician found microscopic blood droplets on the floor near the tool chest where the murder weapons had been returned, suggesting that the perpetrator had stood in that spot while cleaning the weapons before replacing them. These subtle traces, nearly missed in the overwhelming evidence of the primary crime scene, would become crucial in establishing the methodical nature of the killings and the efforts made to conceal evidence, actions that seemed inconsistent with a crime of opportunity or passion. Oklahoma City's Homicide Division, housed in the aging police headquarters downtown, became the nerve center of an investigation that grew more complex with each piece of evidence collected. The flat, open landscapes of Oklahoma that surround the city center seemed to mirror the case itself. What initially appeared straightforward from a distance revealed hidden contours and unexpected depths upon closer examination. Detective Taylor, known throughout the department for her thorough and methodical approach, established a dedicated incident room where evidence boards soon filled with crime scene photos, timeline elements, and the growing list of inconsistencies in Dakota's account. The summer heat baked the concrete city as investigators worked through day and night, the constant hum of air conditioners in the incident room providing a monotonous backdrop to their increasingly disturbing discoveries. When the family computer was analyzed, digital forensic specialist Marcus Chen discovered the searches related to fingerprints, blood cleaning, and juvenile prosecution that immediately shifted the focus of the investigation. The timing of these searches, conducted during school hours when Dakota had stayed home claiming illness while both parents were confirmed to be at their respective workplaces, provided the first concrete evidence contradicting the boy's story about an outside intruder or his friend Tyler. Chen also recovered deleted browser history showing research on disabled home security systems and the specific model used by the Arnolds, searches that had been conducted over several weeks leading up to the murders. The digital breadcrumbs painted a picture of methodical planning that stunned investigators who struggled to reconcile the sophisticated premeditation evidenced by the computer history with the age of the suspected perpetrator. Detective Barnes, drawing on his background in auto theft investigation, noticed an unusual detail during his examination of the family garage: a small notebook hidden behind a loose panel in the wall, containing what appeared to be codes, addresses, and crude maps of residential streets in neighboring communities. When cross-referenced with recent auto theft reports, Barnes discovered an alarming pattern of vehicle thefts in those exact neighborhoods, all occurring between midnight and 4 a.m. over the previous 6 months. The addresses in the notebook corresponded precisely with locations where luxury vehicles had been stolen, with several pages containing what appeared to be notes about security systems, whether dogs were present at the properties, and optimal times for accessing the vehicles. This discovery established a potential connection between Dakota and a sophisticated car theft operation, introducing a possible motive that no one had previously considered. The Arnolds' strict curfew rules directly interfered with their son's criminal activities conducted in the middle of the night. The Oklahoma City Medical Examiner's Office, located in a modern facility that stood in stark contrast to the aging police headquarters, received the Arnolds' bodies on the afternoon of August 9th, with Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Yvonne Martinez personally overseeing the autopsies given the high-profile nature of the case. Her meticulous examination revealed that both victims had suffered multiple blunt force trauma wounds, consistent with the hammer found in Robert's toolbox, followed by precise slashing wounds from the box cutter that severed their carotid arteries. The pattern and precision of the wounds suggested that the perpetrator had researched vulnerable anatomical targets, with the box cutter wounds appearing to have been inflicted after the victims were already incapacitated by the hammer blows. Dr. Martinez noted in her report that the physical strength required to inflict such damage was significant, but not beyond the capabilities of a determined child, especially if the victims were unconscious from the initial attacks and therefore unable to resist. Detective Taylor obtained a warrant to analyze Dakota's phone and social media accounts, discovering communications with his friend Tyler Wilson that directly contradicted Dakota's claim that Tyler had been angry with his parents. In reality, the messages revealed a friendly relationship with no signs of conflict, but did contain coded references to late-night activities and business that made little sense for elementary school children. The communications also revealed that Dakota had been pressuring Tyler to provide him with alibis for several nights when car thefts had occurred, including asking Tyler to lie to his own parents about Dakota sleeping over. Most damning was a message sent from Dakota to Tyler just hours before the murders, stating, "After tonight, no more stupid curfew problems. I'll be free to run things my way." This digital evidence, combined with the computer searches and the notebook found in the garage, began to form a coherent narrative of premeditation that pointed directly at the 9-year-old boy who had presented himself as a traumatized victim. Oklahoma City, with its grid of wide streets and mixture of historic and modern architecture, became the backdrop for a media frenzy as local news outlets began reporting on rumors that the Arnold child was being considered a suspect in his parents' murders. The story captured the public imagination, tapping into primal fears about the corruption of innocence and the unknowable interior lives of children. Community vigils held at Willow Creek Elementary School and the library where Margaret had worked became forums for collective grief and confusion, with parents holding their children closer and neighbors re-examining every interaction they'd ever had with the quiet boy who lived on their street. The flat Oklahoma landscape, stretching to the horizon in all directions from the city center, seemed to mirror the case itself. What initially appeared straightforward from a distance revealed hidden depths and unexpected contours upon closer examination. The forensic analysis of the blood evidence provided the final piece that solidified Dakota as the prime suspect, with blood spatter analysis indicating that the person who attacked the Arnolds would have been considerably shorter than an average adult, consistent with the height of a 9-year-old child. Minute blood droplets found on Dakota's sneakers hidden under his bed contained DNA matching both victims, contradicting his claim that he had only entered the room after the murders were committed. The pattern of the blood indicated direct proximity during the attacks rather than passive transfer from discovering the bodies afterward. The evidence was damning. Dakota's digital footprint showed planning, the notebook revealed motive, messages to Tyler suggested premeditation, and physical evidence placed him at the scene during the commission of the crimes rather than after. Detective Taylor, with 17 years of homicide investigation experience, had never encountered a case like this before. A child not yet 10 years old, who had orchestrated the brutal murder of his parents with a level of calculation that would be disturbing in an adult criminal. As the evidence mounted against Dakota Arnold, Detectives Taylor and Barnes faced the delicate challenge of interrogating a 9-year-old murder suspect, navigating complex legal requirements regarding juvenile questioning while pursuing critical information. Oklahoma law required the presence of an appropriate adult representative for Dakota, a role filled by his maternal grandmother, Elaine Winters, who sat stunned and disbelieving as the detectives carefully explained that her grandson was now considered the prime suspect in her daughter's murder. The interrogation room at the Oklahoma City Police Department's Juvenile Division had been designed to feel less intimidating than standard interview rooms, with comfortable furniture and muted colors. But nothing could soften the weight of suspicion that now rested on the small boy who sat across from the detectives. Dakota maintained his initial story about finding his parents already dead and suspecting his friend Tyler, his voice steady and his eyes dry, a composure that struck both detectives as incongruous with the situation. Detective Taylor employed specialized interview techniques developed for juvenile suspects, using simple, direct questions and avoiding leading statements that might confuse or influence a child's responses. She began by asking Dakota to explain in his own words what had happened the night of August 8th, noting each time his account diverged from previous statements or conflicted with established evidence. The boy described going to bed at his usual 8 p.m. curfew, reading comic books under his covers with a flashlight until approximately 10 p.m., then falling asleep until morning when he discovered his parents' bodies and ran to the neighbor's house for help. When Taylor gently confronted him with the evidence of blood on his sneakers hidden under the bed, Dakota's demeanor changed subtly. A tightening around the eyes, a slight withdrawal in his posture, before he claimed he had entered his parents' room during the night to ask for a glass of water and found them already dead, then panicked and hid his shoes because he was afraid of getting in trouble. Oklahoma City sprawled below the windows of the police headquarters, its downtown skyline rising from the flat plains in a testament to human determination to build something significant in an unforgiving landscape. Inside the interview room, a similar dynamic was unfolding as Detectives Taylor and Barnes worked methodically to construct a case around the emerging truth of what had happened in the Arnold home. The summer afternoon stretched into evening, the harsh Oklahoma sun throwing long shadows across the city, while inside the air-conditioned interview room, Dakota Arnold's carefully constructed story began to unravel under the weight of accumulated evidence and the skilled questioning techniques of experienced investigators. The contrast between the boy's small physical presence and the magnitude of violence he was suspected of committing created a cognitive dissonance that everyone in the room struggled to reconcile. Detective Barnes, drawing on his experience with auto theft investigations, shifted the questioning toward the notebook found in the garage and the pattern of stolen vehicles, watching carefully as Dakota's expression flickered between surprise and calculation at the mention of evidence he hadn't realized had been discovered. Barnes produced photographs of several stolen luxury cars recovered in chop shops across Oklahoma County, asking Dakota if he recognized them, noting how the boy's eyes lingered on certain vehicles with what appeared to be recognition or even pride. When confronted with messages exchanged with Tyler about business and late-night activities, Dakota claimed they were playing a pretend game about being businessmen, but could not explain the specific addresses and security details noted in the hidden notebook. The detectives observed how Dakota's language and demeanor shifted during this line of questioning, moving from childlike simplicity to more sophisticated vocabulary and concepts, suggesting a duality that had allowed him to operate in both a child's world and a criminal enterprise simultaneously. The next phase of questioning focused on the computer searches related to fingerprints and blood cleaning, with Detective Taylor showing Dakota printouts of the browser history from the day before the murders. The boy initially denied making the searches, claiming that perhaps his parents had been researching a crime show they watched. But when Taylor demonstrated that the searches occurred while both parents were at work and provided evidence that Dakota had called in sick to school that day, his story shifted. With a calculated change in approach that disturbed even the experienced detectives, Dakota suggested that perhaps Tyler had come to the house while he was sick and used the computer, attempting once again to direct suspicion toward his friend. This deliberate attempt to frame another child, combined with the evidence of premeditation, painted a disturbing psychological picture of a 9-year-old capable of sophisticated deception and strategic thinking, well beyond typical developmental expectations. Detective Taylor called for a brief break in the interview, stepping out with Barnes to consult with the district attorney's office regarding the mounting evidence and the appropriate next steps in a case involving such a young suspect. In the hallway outside the interview room, both detectives acknowledged the disturbing nature of what they were uncovering. Not just the violence of the crimes, but the calculated planning and attempts at misdirection that suggested a level of psychological development or disturbance that defied conventional understanding of childhood development. Oklahoma's juvenile justice system had never faced a case quite like this one, with a perpetrator so young, yet evidence suggesting such clear premeditation and motive. The case was already stretching the boundaries of existing legal frameworks, raising questions about culpability, competency, and the appropriate societal response to a child who had committed adult crimes with adult reasoning, but within the body and presumed mental development of a 9-year-old. Upon returning to the interview, Barnes introduced a new line of questioning about the community curfew that had recently been implemented in response to increasing vehicle thefts in the area. The detective explained that they had established connections between the addresses in Dakota's notebook and reports of stolen luxury vehicles all occurring during late-night hours, and suggested that the Arnolds' strict enforcement of bedtime rules would have directly interfered with these activities. In a moment that would later be described in court documents as chilling in its transparency, Dakota's response shifted from denial to what appeared to be a cost-benefit analysis, asking detailed questions about juvenile sentencing in Oklahoma and whether his age would guarantee him release at 18 regardless of the crimes committed. This apparent calculation about legal consequences, coming from a child not yet 10 years old, stunned everyone in the room and provided a disturbing window into the thought processes that had preceded the murders. The flat, expansive Oklahoma landscape surrounding the city has long fostered a certain resourcefulness in its residents, a need to create and adapt in an environment that offers few natural advantages beyond space and possibility. This same adaptive intelligence seemed evident in Dakota Arnold, who had created a criminal enterprise and orchestrated a double homicide with a level of planning and execution that would be impressive in an adult offender. Detective Barnes, leveraging his auto theft expertise, pressed Dakota on specific details about how the car theft operation worked, noting how the boy's eyes lit up with what appeared to be pride as he began, almost unconsciously, to reveal sophisticated knowledge about vehicle makes and models, security systems, and the logistics of moving stolen cars. The detectives recognized a pattern common in many perpetrators: the desire to receive credit for their ingenuity, even when that acknowledgement comes in the form of criminal charges. After nearly 4 hours of questioning, with Dakota's grandmother sitting in silent shock as her grandson's involvement became increasingly apparent, Detective Taylor decided to directly confront the boy with the complete narrative they had constructed from the evidence. She calmly explained that they believed he had been running a car theft operation requiring late-night activities, that his parents' enforcement of curfew had threatened this criminal enterprise, that he had researched methods to commit murder without leaving evidence, and that he had executed his parents before attempting to frame his friend Tyler for the crimes. Taylor watched Dakota carefully as she laid out this narrative, noting how his expressions shifted between calculation, defiance, and what appeared to be relief at no longer needing to maintain his fabricated story. After a long moment of silence, Dakota asked a question that would be quoted in case files and eventually news reports across the country. "If I tell you what really happened, can I have my notebook back? I need those codes." The Oklahoma sky darkened outside the windows of the police headquarters as the interview continued into the evening, the sprawling city below beginning to glitter with lights as Detective Taylor carefully documented Dakota's gradual admissions. The boy began to acknowledge elements of their theory while still maintaining that Tyler had been involved, showing a sophisticated understanding of shared criminal liability that seemed impossible for a typical 9-year-old. As his grandmother wept silently beside him, Dakota described with disturbing detachment how the car theft operation had been his idea, conceived after watching online videos about luxury vehicles, and how he had recruited older children at school to help with aspects of the thefts that required greater physical strength. The business had been profitable, with Dakota selling information about security systems and optimal theft times to older associates, until increased police patrols and the new community curfew had threatened the entire operation. A threat made worse by his parents' strict enforcement of bedtime rules that prevented him from conducting necessary surveillance. The Oklahoma County District Attorney's Office faced unprecedented legal questions as they worked to build a case against a 9-year-old murder suspect, balancing the horrific nature of the crimes against Dakota Arnold's age and the complexities of the juvenile justice system. Prosecutor Andrew Patterson, a veteran of complex homicide cases, was assigned as lead prosecutor,